New Hampshire, the state with the first Republican primary of the 2024 election season, is quickly becoming a hotbed for the debate over whether Donald Trump is constitutionally banned from ever serving as president again under the 14th Amendment. This week, a Republican candidate for president filed a lawsuit to disqualify Donald Trump from New Hampshire's primary there. And a former Trump-endorsed Senate candidate made headlines by calling for the Secretary of State to take action. Now, the New York Times is reporting that the activist group Free Speech for the People, quote, sent a letter to the Secretaries of State in New Hampshire, as well as Florida, New Mexico, Ohio, and Wisconsin, urging them to bar Trump from the ballot under the 14th Amendment. The New York Times adds this, quote, that the New Hampshire Republican Party said this week that it would challenge any effort to remove Trump or any other candidates who have met requirements from the ballot. What happens here could lead to a legal showdown that goes all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Joining our conversation, legal director for Free Speech for People, the group that sent the letter to those 5 secretaries of state, Ron Fine, is here. Dahlia Lithwick is back with us as well. Ron, we've heard from Judge Ludig, who kind of legally put this out there by locking arms with progressive law professor Lawrence Tribe. We've heard from a Secretary of State on our program that they're looking at this, along with other secretaries of state in other battleground states. Just take me inside your effort and your understanding of how the Constitution bars Donald Trump from being on the ballot.
Thanks, Nicole. Well, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that anyone who took an oath to support the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States is forever barred from public office unless and until 2/3 of both houses of Congress vote to grant that person amnesty. January 6th was a violent insurrection that not only took over the U.S. Capitol, nearly assassinated the vice president and several congressional leaders, but disrupted the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in our nation's history. That's farther than the Confederacy ever got. And Trump engaged in it by inciting it, facilitating it, fomenting it, and goading the insurrectionists on while it happened. And that's why he is disqualified under the Constitution.
People who, I think, intuit the accuracy and the soundness of what you're saying, I think represent a whole lot of Democrats, a whole lot of independents, and others who don't support Donald Trump. People who support Donald Trump being there either deny the truth, what we saw with all of our eyes and ears, or are the ones who will come up with legal arguments why this is not the appropriate application of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. What do you say to them?
Well, some people are arguing that Donald Trump isn't disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But there's also a lot of people who are basically arguing that the 14th Amendment shouldn't be in the Constitution at all. But it is. We already had that debate about whether somebody who broke their oath and engaged in insurrection is disqualified from public office. We settled that debate in 1866 when we added the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, and then in 1868 when 3/4 of the states ratified it. So just like if Barack Obama showed up with papers to file for running for election as president, he would be unqualified. He's ineligible because he's already served 2 terms. Just like if somebody who's 12 years old filed papers, they're not old enough. Or somebody who wasn't born in the United States, they're not a natural born citizen. These are provisions of the Constitution that define eligibility. And frankly, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applying to people who broke their oath and engaged in insurrection is actually in many ways more important than any of those other qualifications.
Dahlia, there have been a lot of occasions in the Trump era, the last 8 years, when I've had to pull out or research or Google elements of the Constitution. I have done a whole lot of that since Judge Ludig was on my program and preparing for that, and the coverage that has ensued since he and Professor Tribe have put this out there. And they continue almost daily to provide the legal backstop for exactly what Ron is articulating. I want to read what Professor Tribe writes in the New York Times on the role that the United States Supreme Court could play in all of this. Quote, when it gets to the Supreme Court, as it surely will, this will test the dedication of the justices to principles of law. more than almost anything has for a very long time, said Lawrence Tribe, a constitutional law professor at Harvard who believes the insurrection disqualification clearly applies to Mr. Trump. Quote, because they will obviously realize that telling the leading candidate of one major political party, no way, you're not eligible, is no small matter. Now, there is very recent precedent. I mean, Bush v. Gore was, in the view of a lot of Americans, the Supreme Court very much getting involved in disclosure. I think most of our viewers know I worked for George W. Bush. So there is both precedent. Lawyers smarter than me believe that the Constitution plainly calls for this. But I feel like the political conversation is taking a very long time to catch up. Where do you come down on the conversation and the law, Dahlia?
You know, Nicole, I would have been more worried if Moore v. Harper, which was the case that came out of North Carolina this year that was kind of trying to bolster some of John Eastman's wackadoo ideas about, state electoral power and state power to set aside judicial rulings on how elections come down. But the court batted it away. I mean, the court had no patience for what was a completely fanciful argument about how elections come down based on the Constitution. That gives me some sense. And, you mentioned Judge Ludig, you mentioned Larry Tribe, Will Bode and Michael Stokes-Paulson are two incredibly prominent conservative law professors who've just come out with this amazing article saying this is a no-brainer. This is the plain text of the 14th Amendment, provides for this, provides for everything that Ron is saying, and that it's self-executing, and that it's just, there's an amazing line in it that says, this Section 3 is enacted by the enactment of the 14th Amendment. It's disqualified wherever it's triggered, just is. That's the language they use. This is a thing, they say. So this isn't a crazy idea that John Eastman cooked up that the court batted away. This is a very, very serious bunch of legal scholars using originalism to say this is as operative today as it was when it was drafted, and it is in force, and it is not even a question that it must be enforced. So you're quite right. This will percolate through the courts. It will probably make its way to the Supreme Court. I don't think there are 6 or 5 or even 4 justices who have an appetite for continuing to hold up Donald Trump as a paragon of democracy and a believer in the lawful transfer of power. I just don't think this Supreme Court is in the tank for Donald Trump.
Wow. Ron, I'll give you the last word. If you could just play out the process for us. I mean, what should we be watching for in terms of legal milestones as this moves forward?
We at Free Speech for People are pursuing 2 tracks. One, which we've been discussing, is to persuade secretaries of state or other chief election authorities in the states to exercise their own authority to exclude Trump from the ballot. And of course, he would have an opportunity to challenge that in court if he wanted to. The second track is that in the near future, we at Free Speech for People, on behalf of voters in multiple states, will be filing formal legal challenges to Trump's candidacy using state candidate eligibility challenge procedures that are designed to challenge a candidate's qualifications. And he should get ready because they're coming soon.
It's fascinating. I really should have gone to law school, not journalism school. Ron Fine, Dahlia Lithwick, thank you both. Coming up